Thank you very much, Ashley, and welcome everybody. Tonight's topic is going to be, I think, an interesting one for all of you, and that'll be the history of railroads in the Gunnison country. Next week, we are going to have a real special one, and that is going to be skiing in the Gunnison country, and I'll tell you how we're going to do it. I'm going to have about a 10 or 15 minute introduction, and then you folks are going to get an 80 slide show of all the early skiing in the Gunnison country and right on up through Pioneer, up Cement Creek, Rosman Hill, Pershing Mine Hill, Crested Butte. I think you'll really enjoy it. Tonight, with regard to the railroads of the Gunnison country, when I'm finished, we're going to take about 3 or 4 minutes right at the end, and I'm going to show you a series of about 10 to 12 photographs that were photographed by Richard Crabtree in the 40s and the 50s of some of the things that existed in the Gunnison country while the railroads were still running. As I said, some of the people on the chat board, we have Justin Lawrence on board tonight. He is the archaeologist at the Forest Service in charge of the Alpine Tunnel. He'll give us a little update on how the work is proceeding, trying to get that road open again after a rockfall a number of years ago. We also have a trivia question. In fact, we got 2 trivia questions. And whoever is first to answer will get the book, and the book will be on Crested Butte. So here we go, railroads of the Gunnison country. The California Gold Rush of 1849 brought 100,000 Argonauts following the gold mines all the way into California along Highway 49 today. No Highway 49 at that time. That created a great demand for a safe route to get there. You're taking a good look right now at part of the building of that transcontinental line. The 49ers who got to California came through 3 different routes. Number 1 was overland, 1,966 miles from the Mississippi River along the California Trail from towns like Omaha, St. Louis, and St. Joe, Missouri. The trip was fraught with danger, Indians, tough stream crossings, cholera, and the length of the passage killed over 5,000 people on the way. And the trip took 6 months if you were lucky. They came by wagon train. Some people rode horseback. Some people had a wagon pulled by 4 horses. The other 2 routes took even longer. You could catch a boat on the east coast of the United States and then take 9 months going down the east side of South America, across the dangerous Straits of Magellan at the southern tip, and then up the west side to California. That trip took 9 months and was even more expensive and dangerous. The third route was by boat from the east coast to the Isthmus of Darien. That's where the Panama Canal is today. 76 miles from the east coast to the west coast through malaria-filled swamps and lakes to the west coast, where, hopefully, a boat was waiting for you. That route was also long, dangerous, and expensive. So there was a great need for a railroad from the Mississippi River out to California. 100,000 people out there, you needed a good route to get supplies out in the area and more people there. In 1853, under Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, the U.S. Congress authorized 4 surveys for a railroad route, appropriated $150,000. Keep in mind, Davis was a senator from Mississippi. He would be the head of the Confederacy when the Civil War broke out. The northern route was surveyed by Isaac Stevens, ran from Duluth, Minnesota on Lake Superior out to Seattle near the west coast. The southern route was looked at by Billy Park, and that ran from New Orleans to San Diego. The south central route was surveyed by Emil Whipple, and that one went from Memphis, Tennessee on the Mississippi River all the way out to Los Angeles, or all the way out to San Diego, I should say. And then the central route was surveyed by John Williams Gunnison, a 31-year-old second lieutenant of the United States Army from Goshen, New Hampshire. He would follow a route from St. Louis out towards San Francisco. Theoretically, when all surveys were complete, the United States would choose the best route. Shortly after, however, in 1861, the Civil War began and quashed all those plans. During the war, the Northern government approved the Pacific Railway Act of 1862, sanctioning the building of a transcontinental railroad after the war came to an end. A year after the war, two railroads began working on a transcontinental line. One was the Union Pacific, led by a man named Grenville Dodge. It built out of Omaha, Nebraska, and used primarily Irish laborers as it headed west. The other railroad was the Central Pacific, led by the Big Four. Leland Stanford, who later on started the great university bearing his name in Palo Alto, California. The construction boss, Charlie Crocker. Mark Hopkins, the finance man. And Collis Huntington, who later on built the famous Huntington Library in California. The Central Pacific headed out of Sacramento and went to the east. That line used Chinese workers, even though Charlie Crocker, the construction boss, was told he was absolutely crazy. How could men so small ever build a railroad? Yet the Chinese proved to be the best workers in the world. They never got sick like the Irish did from disease and maybe a little extra alcohol as they built west, primarily because their favorite drink was boiling hot tea, which killed all the germs. And they were small enough and light enough to be lowered in wicker baskets in the American River Canyon of the Sierras, so they could plant blasting charges, light the fuses, and then hurriedly be pulled up to the top before the blasting took place. The building of the transcontinental line went on from 1866 to 1869, braving Indians, heavy snow, cold weather, and great geographical obstacles like the Sierras and the Rockies and the desert. Finally, on May the 10th, 1869, at Promontory Point near Salt Lake City, the two railroads met nose to nose. And there's a good example of one of the railroads nose to nose with another one you can't quite see at Promontory Point on May the 10th. The Union Pacific and the Central Pacific were both proud of their workmen. And while they built near Promontory Point, a bet was made as the rails approached completion on which of the two could lay the most rails in a specific distance, with both sides, the Irish and the Chinese, not wanting to lose, and either railroad not wanting to lose. Bystanders watched in amazement as both sides ran with the rails, pounded spikes in double time, and went right by each other before the amazed bosses called an end to the competition. Both sides had laid 8 miles of track, and the laying of rails was called a draw. When the golden spike was pounded in at Promontory Point, the Transcontinental Railroad became a reality. It was called the Union Pacific, and it ran from Sacramento to Omaha, over 1,900 miles, a standard gauge with tracks 4 feet 8.5 inches apart. Colorado and Denver, however, weren't on the line, which ran over the Continental Divide over South Pass in Wyoming instead. Colorado had some real problems, and that was too much snow, too many high passes, and too many canyons to run a transcontinental railroad. Then came the gold rush in Colorado 10 years after California, 1859. With thousands of miners coming into Colorado territory in what became known as an overrated rush. The only areas that really had the gold were Central City, Blackhawk, the little Gilpin, the little kingdom of Gilpin, they called it, California Gulch, soon to be called Leadville, and Breckenridge. When the Civil War came to an end in 1865, Denver and Golden, the two great rivals, wanted a railroad. And now the story turns to two of the greatest Coloradoans ever, William Jackson Palmer and John Evans. And there you see William Jackson Palmer. He was the head of the Rio Grande, a Quaker from Delaware, had served in the Civil War as an officer for the North, then became a director for the Kansas Pacific Railroad. John Evans was from Illinois, and he was the governor of Colorado Territory. He came from a suburb of Chicago, Evanston, which was named for his family, Evanstown, the home of Northwestern University, and that was named for he and his family. He was the founder of two great private universities, Northwestern in Evanston, Illinois, and Colorado Seminary in Colorado, later on called Denver University. Evans was also one of the top 10 Methodist bishops in the nation, and he was involved with the infamous Sand Creek Massacre of Cheyenne and Arapaho Indians in southeastern Colorado in 1864. Both men now became rivals of each other in building a railroad in Colorado. There was wealth to be had, with silver and gold mines opening and ranching taking off, and both hoped to run a railroad out to the Pacific. William Jackson Palmer married a young lady named Mary Queen Mellon of the Mellon Steel family, very rich family in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. On his honeymoon, he went to London, 1869. While there, he saw in the newspaper that a man named Robert Fairley was going to give a talk to the British Locomotive Association entitled Rails of the Future. Palmer gave his wife $200, sent her shopping on his honeymoon, and he went to hear the talk. And Robert Fairley talked about a type of railroad that was relatively unknown in the U.S., narrow gauge, tracks 3 feet wide. The advantages, he said, were that these railroads could get into mining camps first. They could be built for less money. They had less ballast. They could also be built with workers that maybe would be able to build into mining camps very quickly. They could also go around sharper curves and go up steeper grades. Palmer was entranced, and when he came home, he decided to start a railroad that would be narrow gauge, and he called it the Denver and Rio Grande. He started in 1870. The Rio Grande was unique in 2 ways. Number one, it was one of the few railroads in American history that ran north and south. And secondly, it was narrow gauge, kind of unheard of in the U.S. at that time. Palmer hoped to tap out the mines on the west side of the line and the farming produce on the east side of the line as he ran that railroad from Denver all the way to Mexico City. So begin building he did. Came to a town called Colorado City as he came north and south. Didn't like it because that city had gambling, prostitution, a lot of drinking. And he was a Quaker, didn't like it, so he started a new city and he called it Colorado Springs. And it became known as Little London, the new port of the Rockies, a haven for the rich. You go there today and you can see General Palmer on horseback in the middle of Nevada Avenue. You can go to Palmer High School, Palmer Park, Palmer Place, and all kinds of things named for Colonel Palmer. Palmer continued that railroad south to Pueblo, which he made into the Pittsburgh of the West by starting what became known as the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company. It was the only steel mill west of the Mississippi River, and Palmer knew he needed steel for rails and industry. And then from Pueblo, Palmer diverted west, and he diverted west because of the great mining discoveries going on in Leadville and in the other camps. Right off of the bat, he ran into trouble because when he got out where Canyon City is today, he began getting involved in the Royal Gorge War with the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad. There's only room for one line of rails in the bottom of the Royal Gorge, and both sides wanted it. You can see in that photos, both sides hired gunslingers to shoot at each other. They blew up each other's rails, and the war went on from 1874 to 78. And then finally, it went into litigation. And 2 years later, the Boston Treaty was signed, ending the Royal Gorge War. And as part of that agreement, Palmer's Rio Grande got the right to build through the Royal Gorge. The Santa Fe got the right to go over Raton Pass and on into Santa Fe, New Mexico. Palmer wasted no time. He built through the Arkansas River Canyon and came to a town called Salida. In Spanish, it means the exit, in 1880. And then he ran the Rio Grande up the Arkansas River into the booming town of Leadville, which needed a railroad badly. July the 23rd, 1880, the railroad arrived, first one into Leadville. His main line, now headed out of Poncha Springs, and assaulted Marshall Pass at 10,846 feet in elevation, which would take him into the western slope and into the Gunnison country. Meanwhile, John Evans had started a rival narrow gauge. He also wanted to be first on the western slope and into the Gunnison country, and that railroad was called the Denver, South Park and Pacific. His railroad ran out of Denver to Morrison, through Turkey Creek Canyon, and ascended 10,001 foot high Kenosha Pass, and then went through South Park, Jefferson, Como, Fairplay, over Trout Creek Pass, and down into Nathrop, and then Chalk Creek. From there, Evans had a choice. He could run his railroad over 12,000 foot high Altman Pass to the western slope, or he could tunnel under the divide. He chose to tunnel under the divide. He thought that would be a little quicker and beat the Rio Grande in. The Alpine Tunnel, built at 11,523 feet under the Continental Divide, would become the highest in the world and the most famous. He believed that the tunnel would allow him to beat Palmer into the Gunnison country. The race was now on to get to the Gunnison country first and tap into those great silver mining camps of White Pine, Irwin, Gothic, Tin Cup, and Pitkin. Palmer's Rio Grande went from Salida to Poncha Springs, and then began to snake upwards 3,500 feet to the top of Marshall Pass, named for William Marshall of the Wheeler Survey a few years before. And there you got a great shot of the railroad in two spots coming up the east side of Marshall Pass. You can see the railroad right in the middle of the photo, and then guys working on it as it began to work its way up towards Marshall Pass. 1,500 men from Canada, Italy, and southeastern Europe labored in the high mountain air through little construction camps on the east side with names like Mears and Silver Creek, and also Grays, en route to the top of the pass. And there you get a good look at the top of Marshall Pass with the snow sheds. And down below, you can see where some of the men lived and they had their offices. And the reason you had those snow sheds on top of the pass was if you didn't, the wind would blow tremendous drifts in. So on either side of the snow sheds, you had a gate that was closed. And then when the train approached, the train would blow the whistle, they'd open the gate, and in you came. Palmer had bought the Marshall Pass route from the pathfinder of the San Juan, Otto Mears, who had used it as a toll road since building it a few years earlier, primarily because it only had a 4% grade. And there's another great shot of the Rio Grande on top, pretty much near the top of Marshall Pass in the year 1881 as they were building the road. From the top of Marshall Pass, workmen laid rails down the western slope past the construction camps of Shawano, Chester, and Buxton before arriving at Sargent's at the bottom of the pass, and now only 32 miles from Gunnison. Originally named Marshalltown for the creek in the pass, the new construction camp was renamed Sargent's after Joe Sargent, who had had a ranch there and was also the postmaster. The Rio Grande arrived in Sargent's on July the 16th, 1881, and was immediately transformed into a booming end of track. All freight and passengers now had to disembark and continue their journey via freight wagon and stage into Gunnison. For 2 weeks, Sargent's was a booming mining town, a booming supply town with 50 firms, mostly in tents, doing business there. Of the first 14 buildings, 8 were saloons. 6 freight companies operated out of the camp, and Barlow and Sanderson gave stage service to Gunnison. The Denver Rio Grande at Sargent's had a roundhouse, a turntable, a depot, a water tank, eating house, and loading pens. Its monthly payroll was $3,000. Helper engines were housed at Sargent's to help pull heavily laden coal and ore trains over Marshall Pass. When you had 2 helping pull it up, it was called a double header. 3 was a triple header, because you needed those engines to provide enough power to get that coal or ore out towards Pueblo. 100 people lived at Sargent's, was also handled ore from White Pine and Tamichi, and was a center for the Trinchera Lumber Company, which employed 500 people, 500 men turning out timber, mine props, and railroad ties and cabins that were needed as the big boom continued in the Gunnison country. The Rio Grande now began laying track 32 miles into Gunnison, going past sidings with names like Elko, Crookston, Doyleville, and Parlin, right along Tamichi Creek. 1,500 men worked out of 20 camps. On August the 5th, 1881, people heard the whistle of the Rio Grande for the first time just east of town. A New York reporter with the Rio Grande reported, and I quote, "Near the town, scattered in black patches, were hundreds of workmen shoveling and picking as for dear life in work on the grade. Sundown came, but these gangs continued at their work, their lanterns flickering like fireflies over the valley and steadily drawing near to town. The first engine to enter Gunnison was construction engine number 71, called the Pacific Slope, entering town at 2:40 p.m. on August the 6th. And that's what Gunnison looked like right around that time, maybe a year later. One of those goes right down Main Street. One of them goes down to Tamichi Avenue. If you look at that top photo, you can see one of the wells that was used to supply water for the people of Gunnison in the early years. 2 days later, on August 8th, the first passenger train arrived. After unloading the passengers, the Rio Grande engine and cars were turned on a Y. And 2 hours later, the first train left Gunnison with 20 passengers heading for Denver. The great railroad race between the South Park and the Rio Grande was over. The Rio Grande had won by a year. The South Park wouldn't make it until 1882. Both narrow gauge railroads had become famous and both were slow moving, leading to such comments as these: the Denver, South Park, and Pacific, the damn slow pulling and the pretty rough riding. Another statement: you didn't want either railroad to run over you because they were on you for so long. The famous story of a man named Finnegan in charge of writing up wrecks. When a wreck occurred one time, Finnegan wrote a 2-page report. His boss said, "I don't want to read such a long report. Next wreck, boil it down." 2 months later, another wreck, a 1-page report. Boss again got on Finnegan, too long. Third wreck, about 2 months later, Finnegan filed the following report: off again, on again, gone again, Finnegan. And the legendary story about the slowness of both railroads: a pregnant lady on a train between Gunnison and Crested Butte walks up to the conductor and says, "Can't this damn train go any faster? I'm about ready to have a baby." Conductor wagged his finger under the lady's nose, said, "Madam, you should have thought about this before you got on the damn train." The woman wagged her finger under the conductor's nose and said, "I wasn't in this damn condition when I was on this train." Pretty slow train. Another famous comment: it doubles in, it doubles out, leaving the traveler still in doubt whether the engine on the track is going on or coming back. Gunnison now became a beehive of activity from early morning to evening. Railroaders, merchants, teamsters, freighters, businessmen worked feverishly. The Rio Grande now wasted no time, and from Gunnison it laid track in 2 directions. The main line went to the west, following the Gunnison River into the feared and awesome Black Canyon. The other direction was north to the great coal deposits 28 miles away along the Slate River and the East River of Crested Butte. Wheeling to the north, hundreds of men laid tracks toward the Elk Mountains. Palmer wanted his railroad to carry the rich silver deposits discovered in the Elks, and he also needed the coal to fuel his engines and take it to his Colorado Fuel and Iron Company in Pueblo, the only steel mill west of the Mississippi. Coking coal from 154 coke ovens at Crested Butte. Lime from the limestone quarry on the east side of Monarch Pass. Iron from near Trinidad. All came together at the CF&I steel mills in Pueblo. And then a man named Henry Besmer in 1856 had invented the blast furnace. All three of these commodities put in the blast furnace and then blasting air into it, further driving out the impurities. And that is how iron was converted into steel to power the U.S. Industrial Revolution. North went the Rio Grande, past the Almont Stone Quarry 6 miles away, then to Almont 10 miles away, where the Taylor and East Rivers joined to form the Gunnison. The arrival of the railroad there meant that Sam Fisher's toll road to Crested Butte was now obsolete. From Almont, another 6 miles took the Rio Grande to Jack's Cabin, a halfway house on the Fisher Toll Road. From there it was to Glacier, 4 miles to the west, right where glaciers had ended many millions of years earlier. Putting down rails with great speed through the beautiful East River Valley, workmen were now 2 miles from Crested Butte on November the 16th. At noon on November the 21st, 1881, the Rio Grande arrived in Crested Butte amidst great rejoicing by its residents. The Rio Grande had surveyed a line west to Irwin, but had now waited to build that line, seeing if that boom would continue. It did run a 4-mile extension of the railroad to the north along the Slate River to Smith Hill to tap into the rich anthracite deposits there. Now, if you look at that upper picture, you can see Smith Hill up above where the mine was, the tramway, which ran 1,633 feet down on a gravity tram, the full cars going down, pulling the empties going up, and then it pulled it to the anthracite coal breaker, breaking the coal up into 5 sizes, and then the Rio Grande Railroad's right below to collect the coal. That coal mine, way up above the Slate River, was one of the great anthracite coal mines in the history of Colorado. The coal breaker down below that you're looking at was the largest west of Pennsylvania. The future of Crested Butte was now secure. 12 years later, the Rio Grande ran an 11-mile extension west of the great anthracite coal deposits at Floresta. 5 years later, in 1898, another giant coal breaker. Now this, the largest west of the Mississippi, was built there. 114 feet high, 76 feet wide, 124 feet long, and 5 stories high, with each story breaking the anthracite coal up into a different size. It was now the largest coal breaker west of the Mississippi River. However, the tremendous snows kept the railroad from running some 6 to 7 months out of the year. Sometimes 500 to 600 inches of snow fell along the line, and it forced wedge and rotary plows to be used to clear the tracks. Meanwhile, work continued on the main line west of Gunnison. West of town, the Rio Grande followed the Gunnison River to the first construction camp 10 miles away, right near the present-day Lake City Bridge. Kezar. Reporter Ripley Hitchcock of the New York Times, traveling with the Rio Grande, described it. It was a group of board shanties with canvas roofs, a huddle of boarding tents. It had appeared in the night when the railroad arrived, and it lasted a few days. Then it passed, and Kezar died. From Kezar, the railroad ran past the little ranching village of Savoya, and then it arrived at the head of the feared Black Canyon and the little construction site of Soap Creek, soon to be renamed Saponero. A Gunnison News-Democrat reporter said, quote, "The people of Soap Creek live on whiskey. There is no visible means of living beyond that because among 9 saloons, only 1 has a restaurant." The construction camp of Soap Creek became Saponero, a combination cattle, resort, and railroad town, located right where the Lake Fork of the Gunnison River joined the main river and at the entrance of the Black Canyon. Near that spot were the famous 4 bridges of Saponero, which included an auto bridge and a railroad bridge that led one to Lake City in the south, and an auto and railroad bridge that took one west of Montrose, all 100 yards from each other, one of the legendary photos of the West. Now, however, the Black Canyon appeared. Palmer's Rio Grande was able to follow the Gunnison River for the first 15 miles of the canyon. And there you're looking at the famous Kirakanti Needle. And on the other side, you can't see, That was Chipeta Falls as it entered the canyon. 400 Irish and Austrian workers laid tracks in the canyon. Past the Kira Canyon needle you're looking at, Chipeta Falls and Hermit's Rest, all the way to Cimarron. And there at Cimarron, you had a roundhouse. And you can see the engines lined up at the roundhouse at Cimarron, and that's where the Rio Grande had to come out. Ripley Hitchcock, that New York reporter with the train, wrote about the hotel car, the home of 400 men working in the Black Canyon laying tracks. And he said this: there were swarthy Italians, Irishmen with carroty locks, men of a score of nationalities, begrimed, battered, gnawed at as they labored in the bracing Colorado air. It was a glimpse of a hard and cheerless life that I saw. But I turned to go back to the construction train. Someone struck up a rollicking Irish song, and others joined in until the canyon walls echoed back the chorus. On August the 13th, 1882, the first train from Gunnison went through the Black Canyon, heading towards Cimarron, but that's as far as it could go in the canyon. 15 miles. And now in December of 1882, William Jackson Palmer sent his top engineer, Byron Bryant, and 5 men into the Gunnison Gorge below Cimarron to see if rails could be laid down in that area. He was to explore the possibility of that railroad running through the gorge. Bryant thought the journey would take 20 days. It took 68. What he saw had never been seen by another human being. Wild, rampaging water, tremendous waterfalls, canyon walls 2,700 feet high. At one hair-raising section of the canyon, the Wild River dropped 268 feet in 1 mile. In another section, rocks which had fallen from the canyon walls had buried the Gunnison River. But the most dangerous section was the Narrows. There, the canyon narrowed to 44 feet wide, vertical walls on both sides, 2,000 feet high. The distance through the Narrows was 820 feet, with water roaring through at 15 miles an hour. Bryant was very lucky to get through. It took his party 2.5 hours to go down the canyon, 3.5 hours to come up every day for 68 days in a row. When he filed his report in 1883 in February, he started off his report to William Jackson Palmer with the word impossible, and it was impossible. From Cimarron, the Rio Grande would have to leave the canyon and go over Cerro Summit before getting into Montrose en route to Grand Junction. And one other note, the Rio Grande had also built a 36.3-mile grade south to Lake City from Saponaro, laying the grade in 1881, putting the rails in 1888, hoping to tap the mineral wealth of the Lake City mines. Meanwhile, what had happened to the Denver and South Park? John Evans' line avoided going over that high pass, Altman Pass, and began digging the famous Alpine Tunnel. Now you're looking at the telegraph office in one of the buildings at the west side of the Alpine Tunnel with the Rio Grande narrow gauge coming through. Construction camps were set up on either side of the tunnel. The east portal was called Atlantic and the west portal Pacific. The South Park had followed Chalk Creek out of Nathrop east of the divide and headed up the creek past the mining camps of Alpine, St. Elmo, Romley, and Hancock to the east portal of the tunnel. As South Park laborers began to bore, they realized the railroad had made a big mistake. Instead of self-supporting granite, it found instead decomposed granite. That forced the railroad to timber the entire tunnel. 500,000 feet of redwood timber, 1.5 million feet of false timbering was required in the tunnel. At 11,523 feet, the Alpine Tunnel was the highest railroad tunnel in the world. Just getting supplies to the portals required a Herculean effort, as only jack trails existed. There you get a good look at a rotary engine that was used on the east and west side to bore through the snow. 400 to 500 men worked at a time in the tunnel. but nearly 10,000 worked for short periods of time, working at high elevation, buffeted by 40 to 50 mile an hour winds, fighting temperatures dropping to 40 degrees below zero. The workmen walked off the job in droves. Many lasted a few days, hardly any lasted 1 week. The building of the Alpine Tunnel involved the toughest working conditions on any railroad in the history of the West, maybe in the history of the world. The Alpine Tunnel was 1,771 feet long, and with approaches of heavy timbering on each end, measured 2,500 feet. The long snow sheds on each portal kept snow from drifting in and were protected by huge swinging doors. When a train approached, the whistle sounded and men opened the doors. The cost of building the tunnel was $300,000, which would be in the millions by today's standards. Work began in 1880 and continued for 2 years until 1882. The tunnel was built with a slight apex near the middle to allow water to drain out of each portal. That was the exact Continental Divide. My story of being in the tunnel. When I first got here in the early 60s, a few of my graduate students and I would be able to get in the west side of the Alpine Tunnel. And to get in, you had to go through a little opening, kind of a round opening, slide down about 20 feet at an angle, and then get to the bottom. And then with a carbide lamp and hip boots, because there was water down there, you began to walk, and you could walk 2/3 of the way through. The rails were still in. First time I was in there, I got to the bottom, I turned my headlamp to the left, and I saw giant white algae on the side of the canyon walls. It looked like gigantic 7-foot high spiders, and I think I set a record for the high jump. When you got to the exact Continental Divide in the tunnel, we would take 2 pieces of paper, put them in the water, and if you were in the exact divide, some of the paper would go east and some would go west, and that was the exact Continental Divide. The east portal was only a 16-car passing track. At the west portal was Alpine Station, a little community room, a community where South Park men lived. The station on the west side included an engine house, 54 by 153 feet, water tank, bunkhouse, storehouse, section house, and a telegraph office. The engine house could hold 6 engines. From the Alpine Tunnel, and there you see the Alpine Tunnel right there. I want you to go back to that previous, thanks, Ashley. There as the South Park headed down is a great shot of the Palisades. We'll get another one a little later on, but more about the Palisades in a moment. From the Alpine Tunnel, South Park trains made their way past the Palisades, a sheer rock wall which had to be blasted out a mile below the tunnel. The grade was made out of hand-cut stones without the use of mortar, 452 feet long, 33 feet high, 2 feet thick, a monument to the skill and daring of South Park engineers. Now, rockfall came down a few years ago and closed the road. And when I get finished, I'd like to have Justin Lawrence get on the chat box and bring us up to date on what's going on right now. From the Palisades, it was down around the Sherrod Curve, and then Woodstock into the Quartz Creek Valley. At Woodstock on March the 10th, 1884, a roaring avalanche carrying trees, boulders, and snow smashed into the camp, killing 13 and wiping it out forever. It was caused by a South Park train stuck in snow above and trying to break out. Now, there's a good example of the slide about 2/3 of the way through from the west portal, 1/3 of the way from the east side. And that's what kept us from going any further. And of course, all that's closed off to people now because of the liability. From Woodstock, the South Park came into Quartz, a supply camp at the base of Cumberland Pass, and then headed into Pitkin. There is a great shot of the train coming up towards the west portal and the Alpine Tunnel right at the Palisades, that great rock formation. Fantastic. We're known all over the world. So from Quartz into Pitkin, from there it followed Quartz Creek to the QT, where Quartz Creek and the Tamaichi came together. And then it ran parallel to Denver and Rio Grande tracks all the way into Gunnison, arriving there in September of 1882. A loser to the Denver and Rio Grande to be first in the Gunnison country by a year. South Park wasted no time, built out of Gunnison and headed up Ohio Creek, hoping to tap into the great silver deposits at Irwin. However, the boom there had busted, and the South Park dead-ended at the coal town of Baldwin, about 15 miles north of Gunnison and in the shadows of Ohio Pass. You're looking at a shot of Woodstock before the avalanche. One, however, can still walk on the grade, which was built into Irwin, including the famous Palisade Wall. A lot of locals call it the Chinese Wall, although the Chinese never really worked on it. South Park was a railroad named Desire. It became famous for its failures and the sensational construction of the Alpine Tunnel and the Palisades. E.J. Haley wrote of the South Park in a great work entitled Christmas Eve on the Old South Park. And he said this: a glance in our orders, we see that it say, we've stopped for water at Quartz or Midway. The tank on Woodstock must be frozen up tight. I'll bet that it's cold up on the pass tonight. In my mind's eye, I picture Sherrod Sharp Curve, the Palisade Shelf, which will test a man's nerve. I say a prayer that no rock lurks beneath the snow to send us crashing to the depths far below. The thought of Alpine Tunnel I find not appealing. We'll round West Portal with our flangers a-squealing. Down the valley of Chalk Creek, so silent and white, past Hancock and St. Elmo, and down through the night. In 1910, the Alpine Tunnel in Denver South Park came to the end of the line. A slide in the tunnel, the expense of keeping it open, the failure of silver mining camps in the Gunnison country, and the competition with the Rio Grande marked its end. The Denver and Rio Grande ran to the Gunnison country until 1952, when the coal mines at Crested Butte shut down. 3 years later, the rails of both lines were pulled up, and a wonderful era in the history of the Gunnison country came to an end. There is a picture of the Gunnison Roundhouse, and the depot still exists today. There is a picture of the Denver South Park Depot, not far from where the old A&W was on the west side of Gunnison. There is another shot of the rails coming through the Alpine Tunnel. More about that in a moment. All that remained were memories of the Alpine Tunnel, the danger of the Black Canyon, and the snorting little narrow gauge engines that made such a great impact upon the Gunnison country. Gilbert Lathrop said, little engines run by big men. And now I'm going to stop and I'm going to show you some photos taken by a guy named Richard Crabtree in the 1940s and 50s of the railroad. And this one, of course, a little before that ran in the Gunnison country. So here we go. This is a Denver South Park coming out of the west portal of the Alpine Tunnel. Crested Butte with the coke ovens in the 1940s. La Vida Hotel in Gunnison, and a train coming out of the east portal of the Alpine Tunnel. There's a train going through where today is Jack's Cabin, and you can see that it's got a whole bunch of coal cars right behind it heading over Marshall Pass to the CF&I steel mills. There is a shot, and it's a great shot, going down the east side of Marshall Pass. If you look way down below, you're not far from Poncha Springs. There, the top photo is a Rio Grande engine crossing the bridge at Almont in the 1940s, and the bottom is a Rio Grande train going through the Black Canyon. There is the trestle that took you to Floresta, Crested Butte to Floresta, about 14 miles, tapping the great anthracite coal. There is a shot of the Rio Grande and the water tank at Cimarron. There is the Crested Butte Depot. People today say, boy, where are all the other buildings? there is a shot of the Rio Grande at the Gunnison railroad yards. There is the galloping goose that pulled up the rails of the Rio Grande in South Park. And another shot near Crested Butte. Western State football players were hired to do the job in 1955. And now, I hope Justin Lawrence is on board, and Ashley is going to be able to hit the chat box, and Justin will be able to respond, and Ashley will tell how this is going to happen about the condition, hopefully, of the Alpine Tunnel and the Palisades and the road.
Actually, so Justin, if you don't mind, I can actually allow you to talk if you're okay with that. Let's see here. It might be a little bit easier.
Give us a second or two, folks.
Okay. So Justin, all you have to do is unmute your mic. There you are. How are you?
Good. How are y'all this evening?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Give us a little update, if you would, for everybody.
Well, thank you, Dwayne, for giving a little background and history for everyone. As you know, the Alpine Tunnel is a difficult place to work. And in 2016, during the winter, avalanche / rockfall came down and took out a portion of the Palisade wall. And since that time, we've been trying to get designs to rehabilitate the road and the wall the best we can to get it open to the public again. So since that time, we've acquired some funding through Great American Outdoors Act. And this past summer, we conducted rock scaling to remove all the rocks above that could possibly take out the wall again, as well as protect workers in the future. We also had engineers out this summer, and we have engineering designs that have been approved to reconstruct the wall and the road base. And at the current time, we are putting it out for bid this winter. And we have 3 contractors that are currently interested in working in that environment. That is the quick and dirty of it at the moment.
Justin, thank you very much. One quick question. When do you think the road might be open?
My guess, if depending on how the bid process goes this summer, they would work on it this summer, and that would mostly be road-based work. And then the second summer would be concentrated on recreating the wall and the capstones on top of it.
Justin, thank you very, very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions?
If you have any questions for Justin, just put them down in the chat box, and then I can, if he can see it, or I can relay the questions to him.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Justin.
Yeah, just hang on, Justin, just a second, and we'll see if any questions come through for you. Just give it a minute.
All right.
Oh, wait,
there we go. Yeah, nice work, Justin. Thanks for your work. Can't wait to see the rehabilitation of the Alpine Tunnel. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
I think that's a desire for everyone.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, we are ready for the trivia questions. There are 2. Ashley's going to tell you how to answer, and the Crested Butte book will be on the way by the end of the week.
Hold on, Dwayne. I have to, let's get this situated before. Let's see.
We're getting set here. Hang on, everybody.
Okay, guys. Yeah, I have the chat box open. So Dwayne is going to continue on.
All right, here are the trivia questions. There are 2. Number 1, the Alpine Tunnel was built under what 12,000 foot high pass? And number 2, I want to know the name of the camp wiped out by an avalanche, killing 13 people along the South Park line.
Altman and Woodstock?
Wow, Grierson, that was fast. Bill Grierson got it. Altman Pass and Woodstock. Fantastic. Bill, we're going to get your address. Ash will get your address, and we'll have a book on the way. Thanks, everybody. Now, Pete Dunda's on tonight, and I want to remind everybody that on December the 28th, we got a Christmas polka party. Pete Dunda and his band right here at the museum. Very exciting. Next week, going to be real exciting because you're going to see 80 photos, and I'm going to give a little comment on each one of them after a 10-minute introduction of Pioneer, Rosman, skiing in the 80s, Crested Butte, Pershing Mine Hill, etc. There were 11 ski areas that had lifts in the history of the Gunnison country. So, are there any questions that anybody has or any comments that anybody has right now? Appreciate all of you coming. Got about 170 people registered for the class, so it's a real contribution for all of you folks. Any comments or questions, everybody? I see Karen Peterson and Karen Zoltenko are on. Wow, that's great. Yeah, thank you. Oh, Matt Sherman's on. Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Vicki. Susan, thank you. Robbie.
Oh.
The tunnel, Robbie, was 1,771 feet inside. And then with the sheds on the outside, it came to 2,500 feet.
The tunnel will be accessed from the east side.
Yeah, you know, Bill Grierson says, I've got 60 of those photos, Bill. We only showed about 14 tonight, and maybe down the line we'll show them all. They're really great. Cheryl, thank you for the kind comment. Any other questions or comments? How long was it in use, Robbie said? Well, it opened, Robbie, in 1882, was closed for a number of years, around 1895, and then up until 1895, and then closed for good in 1910. Oh, Richard Crabtree's been posting them on Facebook. Oh, good deal. I don't know if he's still alive. These are photos taken in the 40s and 50s. They're fantastic photos. I really congratulate him. And who's got them now, Ashley?
Well, the Denver Public Library digital collection and then the Colorado Historical Society.
Yeah, they got them there too.
That's who has the photos.
Which is great, yeah. Thank you from Eldora Station, the terminus of the Switzerland of America. Wow. Lake Eldora. So, wow, you're not too far from Amtrak.
Mhm.
Yeah, Nancy, thank you very much for the kind comments. Yeah, the Switzerland Trail of America. That's a great one. Who posted that? I don't see your name.
It is Douglas.
Douglas Dart. Oh, thanks, Douglas. Any other comments or questions, folks? Looking forward next week to the skiing history of the Gunnison country. I think everybody be excited about it. 13 inches of fresh powder. Ashley's got banged up a little. She can't ski tomorrow, but I can, and she's bummed out. Folks, thank you very much.
Oh, we got a new message. Hold on.
We got a new
Two.
message. Karen Peterson, thank you. Karen Zoltenko. I don't remember the depot, but my first meal when I came to Western was at the A&W. Yeah, the depot was gone by then, Karen, but it was not far from where the A&W was. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for being on. Over and out.
Thank you, guys. And just want to give another shout out to our sponsors, Bud Bush from Bluebird Realty, Kachiver Saloon, and KOA Dave. We really appreciate it. Have a good night, guys. Stay warm. Okay, how do I?
Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah, of
Worked out
course.
great.
I did.
Appreciate it.